I adore this game, and I hated it the first time I played it.
You did.
Yeah.
Let's jump into it. Let's roll the clock back a little
Splash.
bit, because like you said, this dropped at the very tail end of last year while we were busy pre-recording all of the podcasts, doing our end of year lists. And even though it did get an honorable mention in the Game of the Year ranking that we did, and we didn't really talk about it in depth all that much. And I do think this game, it makes such a good first impression. I wasn't really excited for it. I think on the podcast that we've done previously, in the videos that we have put out on the channel, I was never convinced by the trailers. I didn't really know what it was. I thought it looked a little bit ropey. I thought graphically it had this kind of uncanny sheen to it. But actually jumping in the game and experiencing it for myself and getting to explore that absolute lush Vatican recreation at the very beginning of the game, which is so detailed, which has so much to do in it, so many kind of subquests and collectibles. That's when I started to fall in love with it, and everything started to click, because I was thinking it was going to be an Uncharted-esque action game, where it's, at least in the early part of the game, in those more exploratory areas, it slows things down, and you've got a bit of stealth, you've got a bit of like immersive sim style exploration that you do, and on top of the combat and a bit of gunplay as well.
They didn't advertise it anywhere near as strongly as they could have, because I feel like there was that bit. I remember the trailer, whether it was the launch trailer or one of the original trailers, where they showed a bit of the combat. It looked a bit ropey because you can grab like stunned enemies and punch them a couple of times, and that's not a bad animation, but it's one of the worst ones, like worser ones, I guess, compared to how fluid a lot of the other combat can be, or like the whip hit and like disarming an enemy because you're pulling the gun out of their hand and then following it up with a giant haymaker and whatever, or getting knocked down in a fight and then your second life is putting your hat back on and going back into the fight. Like, there's so many like cool little elements there where they're going for this whole idea of what if you were doing an immersive sim as Indiana Jones and not a first-person Uncharted, and they could have led with that so much more. Because like you said, the first Vatican level is just, you're Indiana Jones in a historical place, do whatever you want for as long as you want. There's tons to find. And I think they nail the whole, like, walking into a tomb, walking into something underground, something secretive that you figured out yourself, and that, like, wonder that the character has of, like, oh, this is so cool, like, I've just found this ancient thing. And I think that's really cool. They do that all in Giza as well, which is at the Egyptian level that they do.
Yeah.
And like I said, it goes away a little bit, but the story kicks in so well at near the end of the Giza stuff.
Nice.
And it's all bolstered by all the side things that you can find. Because if you just go main missions, you'll burn through the Vatican stuff and the Giza stuff as well. But if you spend time doing all the side things, then once they start going like, oh, this is the main thrust, you're like, well, I know so much more about what it means that all this stuff is kicked in. But I love it. I think, and also I went on such an indie binge across the holidays. I watched all 3 movies. I tried Crystal Skull, couldn't get through the opening of that, even though I'd seen it before. But where were you on indie overall?
Well, this is another thing that was kind of working against it, because I used to love the original trilogy when I was young, but I kind of left that in childhood along with the likes of the Power Rangers, and I kind of brought with me the likes of Dragon Ball Z. I feel like I talk about this a lot, but I like the idea that you leave some stuff behind and you bring stuff with you. Indiana Jones was left behind, right? I've watched all the movies, but I've never been, enamored with the world since I was a kid. So again, I was going into this thinking, well, I've had Indiana Jones elsewhere. I've had a version of this story in Tomb Raider. I've had it in Uncharted. But what I love about this story so far is that it's really funny. I don't know how you feel about this, but I just find the game's sense of humor like right up my street. Whether it's being overtly quippy in the dialogue, or whether it's just in the kind of player-driven actions that you do, whether it's like a punch which feels like you're breaking down a mountain.
The best punch ever.
Oh man,
proper like old school Hollywood punch sound effect, like psh, when you're whacking a guy.
It's like the old school sound effect, but it's also the kind of the impact of it. Like if you stealth, quote unquote, knock out someone in this game, like you might have a sledgehammer, you creep up behind a Nazi who's sitting on a chair, you slam the sledgehammer down, and the guy, like, his brain goes through the concrete.
The guy next to him doesn't notice.
No, he doesn't notice, and you just, like, absolutely demolish this fella. It's stuff like that where I just find that the game has so much charm, again, in that Vatican level. You've got sort of Hitman-esque disguises, so you're walking around dressed as a priest, and you're doing...
also lamping the crap out of people dressed as a priest. Like,
also doing that, man, yeah. You're talking to the sisters and doing side missions for them. You're pretending to be this kind of American priest who's come over to the Vatican, and no one buys it, but you're still committing to the bit and you're still doing it. You can get other disguises, like you can get like the fascist disguise, so you can blend in with the people who kind of have the Vatican under control and stuff like that. That kind of Hitman sandboxy element. I think they could have taken it a little bit further, but I didn't expect that it was going to be there. And like you said as well, I think what makes that exploration even more rewarding, and again, I've not really gotten to the point where the plot is really kicking off, but all of those side missions, like you said, seem to inform at least some elements of that main plot, flesh something out, give you a bit more context. And that just makes everything feel like holistic and it coheres.
Yeah, I think overall all the side things make you have a thirst for knowledge and history, which I think the movies occasionally dabbled in. Like obviously it's the thrust of the character, but like to me, having watched the trilogy like in a row, like Temple of Doom is an abomination. The last half hour of that movie is really, really fun, but the first bit of it is like obviously horrifically racist for the time, and there was a whole thing at the time where India was like, we're not letting you film this here, and they filmed it in Sri Lanka instead.
I did not know that.
It was a whole thing, and you can tell that movie's aged like hell. George Lucas himself was going through a divorce at the time, said he wrote it because he was in a dark place, you can tell. And so I think bits and pieces of the movies don't do the character as justice. Even though the idea of Indy and the aura of this like explorer who punches his way through things, but also is incredibly smart, is so influential, and like you wouldn't have Lara Croft or Nathan Drake or whatever without him. But it is that thing where when you start making a game about like that mentality, and you take all those movies as one, then you have the action from the end of Temple of Doom, you have the sort of youthful curiosity from the beginning of Last Crusade, and you have the weird relationship that Indy has with women, and like the relationship that why he's so outwardly aggressive sometimes, but actually underneath that is like a young boy who had like a weird childhood and a disconnected father, and it's like he's put on this persona taken from thieves that he himself fought on a train robbery or whatever. So it's like the game interrogates all that stuff in a way that none of the movies do fully. And I think that is fascinating because you have like a series of movies and an IP that is weirdly handled over the years. Like Spielberg saying like, I didn't even like the script in Temple of Doom, but I got an excuse to shoot some action, so it was fun. Like there's just literally interviews with him going like, it was bad, but we did it, like whatever. And then when you look back on it, it's like, okay, this worked, this was mature enough to take forward, this is worth the character or whatever. And then they make a game that reflects all of that. And I think this is like the best Indiana Jones thing. And especially you add the interactive element, and you're like, you want to play, you think the same way he does after a while.
Yeah.
In terms of like I said, a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for exploration.
I love that. It's quick sidebar, I suppose. It's funny you mentioned the end of Temple of Doom, because I've not watched the original trilogy again for over a decade.
Oh, you should go through Temple of Doom. Oh my God.
But I caught the last half hour of Temple of Doom on Christmas television while I was around my girlfriends over the holiday period. And I thought, maybe this movie is the best thing ever made, because it was just all those action set pieces.
It's awesome.
The minecart ride and the bit on the bridge and all of that. And I was like, this is unreal.
The last like 45 minutes, it might be just half an hour, but the last like 30 to 45 minutes of Temple of Doom are the best, maybe the best individual sequence apart from the beginning of Last Crusade and the whole series.
Wow, okay.
And that's the bit you saw where it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Well, that was Spielberg fully cooking.
Yes.
Of like, we need to rig this all up and do these like insane stunts that you just wouldn't even do today because they're too risky. And certain wide shots, I don't know if you noticed, but some of the miniatures are insane.
Oh, yeah.
Like little puppets in tiny minecarts. So good.
Oh, yeah, like you said, Spielberg absolutely was cooking up something special with that. But also, like you mentioned there, that wider Indiana Jones mythology, the thematics, that stuff that's just kind of sieved through my brain over time, so I haven't picked up on as much of that stuff. The Indy characterization in this game, I find all right. I'm so sorry to say this. I have a real problem with Troy Baker.
I love Troy Baker.
Modern Troy Baker. He has given me some of my most favorite performances ever. I still think his Joel in Last of Us 1 and Last of Us 2 is pretty much untouchable. Like the work he does in the second game, I think is the most nuanced stuff he's ever done. I think he brings such a level of depth to that character in the second game through his few scenes scattered throughout it that are just it's amazing. It's a great piece of work. I'm never going to call him bad, but he does have roles, I find, where I can only hear Troy Baker and I can hear him trying.
That was the case in Shadow of War. Mordor, sorry, yeah.
In stuff like that, in stuff like Miles Morales, which I'll talk about later on, that was kind of when I first started just thinking I would have liked maybe someone else in this role because I can't get away from it. Maybe it's just a me thing, but this time around, he does a good Harrison Ford sort of impression at times, but in a weird way, I almost don't think he makes the character his own enough. I'm really torn on it because sometimes I don't know what he's going for. I don't know if he's going for an original take and I don't know if he's going for an impression. And I can't split the difference between those two things. And again, it's not bad. It's fine. Just as the main character, as the focal point of the game. You know, his name's in the title. With all of this history, it's not been working for me, but it's not a standout feature in the way that I was hoping it to be.
It's interesting because for the movie trilogy, like you think about Indiana Jones as a character, it's like if you treat him as like an archetype or like the main version of that character is the one from the first movie. It's the Raiders version. Like he's obviously in Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, but Temple is like really goofy and he's kind of a James Bond kind of character at the very beginning, and it's like really over the top stunts, and then at the very end, it's like he has the shirtless bit and he's fighting on the bridge, and it's like way more sort of, like I said, kind of more James Bondy or more like over-the-top action as compared to some parts of Raiders. Then Last Crusade, it's all the father-son dynamic, and that's when you get the reveal that he's kind of like more of like a boy, not really a man. It's all a facade, like whatever. And but if you make a game about Indiana Jones, you could pull from different parts of it. But it seems like they pull from the Raiders version. Obviously, the game is set like just after Raiders.
Yeah.
But because of that, when you bring Troy Baker in, to me, he's playing that like I said, if Indiana Jones was an archetype, you're playing that sort of Indiana Jones 101 and then deconstructing it with what happens throughout the story with Gina and like and just the way the interactions that he has with that Jones has with Emmerich Voss, the main villain, and the way that he sort of deconstructs parts of, or tries to, in an Indiana Jones context, deconstruct that character.
Yeah.
It is a thing where he's going for Harrison Ford 101, and to me, he nails that. And then I like how vulnerable and how much the character comes apart as the game goes on. That's why I think it's the best Indiana Jones thing. But you've not got there just yet.
That's it, yeah.
You're just about to hit that stuff, but not just yet.
That stuff is still yet to come.
Right now, you're indulging in the bit where they're like, here's some space, you're Indiana Jones, go have fun.
Yeah, which I guess I'll go into some more negatives I have because I was loving this game until I got to Giza, and I think it's a fine location, right? But compared to the Vatican, it's just, to me, it doesn't have that same level of detail or interest. It's funny, I was watching, just before I came back to work over the weekend, I was watching Conclave for the first time, and obviously that takes place entirely in the Vatican, and it was so cool having watched that movie just after playing that part of Indiana Jones because they nail it. Like both recreations look so cool, and there were parts of Conclave where I was distracted because I was thinking that's from Indiana Jones. Right. I was just sneaking through there and punching Nazis in there. But with Giza, even though I've explored it the same amount, it's felt a bit more nondescript. It's felt a bit more video gamey, truth be told. Where it's kind of like,
here's the enemy zone.
Yes,
watch out for that. Yeah.
Here's the enemy zone. Watch out. There's a lot of space in between them, which of course, you're in the desert at this point. But it just kind of felt like it didn't have this, for me, the same level of flow. It's still good content. I've still never hit a mission in there where I've thought, oh, this is a bit of a slog, I don't really want to do this. Just coming off the high of that opening level, it has kind of dropped and maybe gotten into a bit of a familiar rhythm with the stuff, but it sounds like I'm going to hit more story beats going forward. So maybe once I get out that area, I might be back up on the roller coaster.
Yeah, I think giving it the benefit of the doubt, I think that's intentional in regards to you're being pulled out of your comfort zone by the end of the Vatican. Like what happens at the end of the Vatican area is fundamentally ripping Indiana Jones out of his comfort zone and putting him somewhere else. Then he has to deal with it. And then, we'll see I'm going to see how the story wraps overall. But like I said, they break the character down in a way that the movies absolutely don't. And give him like a real vulnerability and a real sort of like, I'm just making this up. I actually have no idea. Like it's working kind of, but I don't know. And I really like the way that they do that, considering how sort of strong the character is overall. I think it's fun, or it's worthwhile giving an extra dimension to that. And it feels so authored. It feels like something that should be in the main canon. Like I don't even know if this is recognized by the likes of George Lucas and Spielberg or whatever. But this it has a confidence throughout that I think is phenomenal. I think the release window, because I forget the actual day, but it was right at the beginning of December.
Yes, yeah.
Means that it missed out on the Game Awards and our awards and whatever. So I wonder if it'll get picked up a lot more across this year, because it really is phenomenal. There's been a couple of achievements where they're rare ones, and they're I'm just doing everything, but I'm doing just side stuff, and even some of the most immediate side things, it comes up as a rare achievement. So I'm like, people aren't getting through this in the way that they could be.
Well, let's talk about that, because like you mentioned when we first started talking about Indy Jones, like you didn't have a good time with it at first. For the first couple of hours in the Vatican, like, you were not enjoying it at all. Like,
No.
what changed, and how would you recommend people, if they do jump in, like, tackle what it is?
So the thing that I hated was I just played it at the wrong time. The headspace I was in was putting end of the year stuff together. Like, I was ill, and I was just trying to do like the end of the working year. And so I was like, let me just play a bit of indie so I can see what that's all about, and I can factor that into the conversation if we do, like I said, honorable mentions and things like that. And at the very beginning, it is I hated at the time. I still don't like it that much. They recreate the Raiders intro.
Yeah, it's a bit wonky, isn't it?
And it's really slow, and you're just kind of like, at the very beginning, you're just walking forward, waiting for the NPCs to catch up, waiting for the scenes to trigger. You can go ahead in certain parts and trigger them yourself, but you're just doing the opening of Raiders from first person. And I just thought that was, it felt wonky. Like, the exploration feels weird. You're on a path, but it's an open jungle, and you're like, well, where am I going? This just feels bad. And so I was kind of like, okay, like, come on, like, this is such a horrible intro. And you don't even see Indy for ages. You see him the same way you do in the movie. He steps out of the shadow. But I just thought it just felt so weird and wonky. And so I didn't like that. The pacing I thought was way off. And then when I got to the Vatican and they want you to sort of explore and do stuff, and I was like, I have no motivation at all. Like, I don't care about the character. You've not really ingratiated him to me because you've just recreated the movie. But it was definitely a pacing thing where I was like, I'm trying to get to something faster than it wants to give me. And so I just put it down. I deleted it because I was like, I'm never going to get through this. And then obviously the accolades, people loving it, whatever. And I was like, oh, let me give it another shot. And I think because I was out of the Game of the Year stuff, and just being able to play it at the pace it's presenting. If anything, the intro is an indication of you should walk everywhere.
Yes.
And you should take everything in and drink in the lush visuals. And if you're Indiana Jones, you're psyched that you're in a jungle. You're psyched that you're finding an old Mayan statue. And what does it go? What does it go? Where does it go? That's cool. And so once I started applying that mentality, then I drank in every single inch of the Vatican level, and then Giza and what's happened after that. And I love all of the set design and all of the historical stuff. It's even had me Googling and learning about actual human history.
Nice,
and
man.
like just all these things that they pull from to make the story. Where I was like, is that real? I'm going to Google that. Oh my God, that's real. Let me read about that. And so like, yeah, it's definitely I think the intro's good if you love the beginning of Raiders. Like,
Right.
I do. It's fine, but I didn't want to play it like that. But ultimately, just go with the pace that the game is presenting.
Yes.
Even though there are outdated tropes or mechanics or whatever you want to call them in regards to we are waiting for this NPC animation to finish kind of thing. I think it puts a weird foot forward with that.
It does. No, I would agree. It's almost got two intros, I think. You've got the Raiders recreation, which I also found not all that inspiring. But then I really did enjoy the kind of quote-unquote proper intro where you could skip forward. You wake up as Indy Jones in his college.
Jones.
I like we're on first name basis.
DJ.
Yeah. You wake up in college, something's amiss, and you kind of go downstairs and you
That
see
should have been the intro.
big hulking Tony Todd, who I did not know was in the game, which was a huge surprise, and for
awesome.
me at least, and was a huge joy. I was, that was when I was having real fun with it. I thought, I love this level. I love what you're doing here. I like the mystery that you're setting up, and I love Tony Todd, and I like, being in a fight with him where he just absolutely smacks
Giant Tony
a
Todd.
recreation of Harrison Ford across the face, and then nicks off, and you have to go hunt him down. Like that set the scene way more than, like you said, the Raiders recreation. But I would also agree. I think it's a game that kind of wants you to slow down, wants you to take your time.
Massively.
I would even struggle so far describing it as an action game. It's like an action adventure in the kind of
Guns
classical
break.
sense.
They're only good for a few hits, and you drop them if you climb a ladder. You're not supposed to be shooting your way through it.
Exactly, yeah. And going back to something I love the fact that I can have my revolver and I can turn it and hold it the other way around and then smack people with the butt of the revolver to knock them out. Stuff like that. Like, I'd go back to it. That kind of Hitman level of you're in a sandbox, you need to complete these objectives, do it kind of how you like, stealth around, do whatever you want, find ways to circumvent the obstacles that the game has put in your way. That's where the game is excelling for me, in that player-driven stuff, but it's because I haven't really jumped into the meat of the story, it sounds like, yet. So I'm going to be interested to see going forward if it gets a bit more linear, like you mentioned, how that stuff meshes and what parts of the game I end up liking.
Yeah, I mean, so far the linear stuff has been impressive in regards to like the presentation, but I love the Vatican's so far been the high. Although I really love Giza as well.
Yeah.
But I have like a thing for it. I love Egyptian history and that kind of stuff. So I thought they did that really well. It reminded me so much of the early Assassin's Creeds, especially AC1, where like I said, it's that line of like, what are they pulling from? What did they invent? And where did you inject the story to be like, we're pulling from real world history to be like, oh, actually, when this happened in real life, this thing happened over here. And I'm like, that's so cool. I want wanted to just mention before we move on, if we move on, that the melee combat I love how improvisational it is. I love that you can pick up any item, and that is so like 80s Hollywood and obviously so indie. Where it's just sort of like realizing you're in a fight and be like, oh, what can I get? Okay, let me get this pipe, let me get this bottle, let me get this fly swatter, and just whacking a guy or throwing it at them. And I love that they like have confidence to give you like a series of enemy interaction moves. Like you have a push, you have the whip, you have like ways to mess with enemies.
Yeah.
And it's like you can like, you know, disarm them with the whip, you can push them over ledges, you can push them into each other, or whatever. And I like thinking like indie in a fight.
Yes.
Being like, I know I can punch, but I need to like free him up. So let me do this. And then like grabbing a guy and throwing him against the wall while I deal with the other guy. And I'm like, that is just, like I said, it's 80s Hollywood in a nutshell. And no game that I can think of has even done that.
I had a moment that was similarly kind of 80s action humor. I thought that was entirely unscripted.
Humor totally comes through.
I was sneaking around just one of these enemy bases, just a small little camp, and I didn't have any weapons, and I needed a weapon to start stealth killing them properly without drawing attention, yada, yada, yada. So I was sneaking deep behind enemy lines, and I picked up the only thing that was around, which was a small toilet brush. And I thought, well, that's going to be useless. So I snuck around one guy, went into another area, finally saw a nice little handle sticking out of a bucket, picked that up, and it was a bigger toilet brush. And I thought, that is just unbelievable, man. Like that's the kind of stuff entirely accidental that you encounter a lot in the game, and it just makes you think like, I am in a ridiculous situation, but in that kind of very charming way that Indy Jones, my pal, always finds himself in the movies, where you think like, I need to improvise my way out of here, and what have I got on hand? A whip, maybe one bullet in a toilet brush.
And also it's so easy to forget that you have the revolver on you, unless you break it, like at all times. To the point where I recreated the bit from Raiders, where like a dude was coming at me, and I was like, just revolver shoot you, and then I'm done. And their death animations are so fun, especially when you knock them out and they stagger and fall over a ledge or whatever. I just there's a lot to love, man. Like it's really, really well designed.